On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and filmmakers. This week's On Story, Red Eye and Disturbia writer Carl Ellsworth. American Horror Story and X-Files legend James Wong. And shut-in writer Christina Hodson.
The thing that psychological thrillers do so well, that horrors can do, but psychological thrillers do well, is tapping into like fears that we all have. Like, how many people in this room have seen a ghost? Maybe a couple. But how many of you have at some point felt threatened by another person, or felt uncomfortable or weird or scared in any way? Like that's so real.
In this episode, our panelists explore the psychology of terror that taps into the root of cinema's fears and anxieties.
How would you explain the difference between psychological thrillers and horror? And that's open for any of you. Or is there that much of a difference?
I mean, that was kind of what I was saying in the beginning, that I think that it's when it's more about what's going on in your head. And you can have supernatural elements in it, but I think it's when the scares are coming more from the psychology of the characters and the dynamic between the characters. And I actually think American Horror Story does an amazing job of being a psychological thriller that is a horror, like it's a horror show. It's a very hard line to tread, and that show kind of does it remarkably well.
Generally, I mean, I guess before American Horror, series were either procedurals like Law and Order, where you can keep on going forever, or they were just very limited, either miniseries like Roots or something like that. And the idea of these miniseries that could go on, either with the same cast or not, like True Detective, that wasn't there until American Horror 6 years ago. The interesting thing, I think, too, in doing the discussion is that I think movies have an opportunity to have that slow build, and you're telling one story, and you're layering your characters. But when we do American Horror Story, the hard part is really we're doing a 1 hour show that has these builds. We also have to throw in scares because it's a horror movie, it's a horror show, so we have to achieve that as well.
Mr. Walker? Mr. Walker?
When you have all these great actresses, Jessica Lange and Sarah Paulson, and you want to give them something meaty, and that's where the emotionality of the characters and their backstory. So those things kind of allow this psychological aspect of the show.
Shelley was brought to us, having been given the preposterous diagnosis by a psychiatrist, comparing her to a wood nymph.
You mean a nymphomaniac?
Just more nonsense from the charlatans. That young woman is a victim of her own lust. There's no other name for it. Mental illness is the fashionable explanation for sin. You said your name's Lana? After the movie star. Now there's a train wreck of a soul. Jennifer Jones, however, there's a true lady. You've seen Song of Bernadette.
Oh, it's a classic.
Yeah.
But at Briarcliff, I hear you're the true star.
Oh, no, not me. The Monsignor Timothy Howard. He's the real visionary. Sit down, you make me nervous.
The projects that I'm attracted to, tend to involve the every man, every woman character involved in, extreme and often horrifying scenarios, and how do they, hopefully get out of them in one piece. And it's like, yeah, most of the time, I don't know where we talked about this. I developed this sort of sense yesterday. I'm a student. Die Hard is one of my favorites. It was a huge influence on me. Just in terms of that, that's the ultimate kind of, just trouble just visiting you out of nowhere when we're just trying to get wake up in the morning and say, so that's kind of how I approach every day, really. It's like, what's going to come out of nowhere and just mess up my day, and I'm going to be so ticked off about it. But anyway, so I've just been attracted to that. Mostly, it's like, initially Die Hard is an action. I would also say it's an action thriller in a way, but since then I've been kind of playing in those areas, and I guess maybe I'm exercising some things by just getting it out on paper or something. So
when I was growing up, I loved scary movies. I loved the feeling of being scared. I watched Child's Play when I was way too young. I have older sisters, and I remember being so scared that I slept under my friend's desk because I was just like, I can't be on my own. So I slept curled up in a ball. And I loved that feeling. And I'd started feeling in movies like, I would be in them, I'd be watching them, I'd be into it, I'm loving it, I'm loving being scared. And then we'd get to the end and it would just be trying to be different, some supernatural, something that didn't really make sense. And that always kind of let me down, because the thing that I loved is kind of the thing actually that we're all talking about, which is what separates psychological thrillers from horror. It's people. People have asked me, over, as I started writing, would I write a monster thing? Would I write a ghost thing? Would I write a supernatural thing? And I always generally say, I would, but I would rather write people, because people are scary. People are weird and even nice people and nice families. But in every family, there's something kind of rich and weird and strange, and I love that stuff.
We kind of had this underground script network. We would always kind of hand off scripts and study scripts. And one of the scripts that I'd read was a very early draft of Phone Booth. And I read through that. I'm like, God, it can't be this. This is so simple. And it was these is just two people talking, and I was just completely riveted by that idea. And so that was sort of where the germ of the idea for Red Eye was like, man, no, this is, I want to do something like this. I was like, man, in that film, it's great. You have your protagonist in a phone booth. You have the voice on the phone. I don't know if you've seen it with who's voiced by Kiefer Sutherland. He's a sniper, and he's holding Colin Farrell hostage in a phone booth for about an hour and a half.
You've done much better than the others, and you will get another chance to end this. I'm just not finished yet.
Yeah, well, I am. There's nothing keeping me here.
You mean besides the fear of death?
Look, I dive out now, and you got one shot, and I'm gonna be dancing. You think you can get me?
Well, I could go for some target practice.
One shot, and they'll be looking for you. A second shot, you give yourself away.
Go on, Stuart. Hang up. Trust your fate to the friendly men in flak jackets with automatic weapons. I'm sure you can patch up that little misunderstanding about the dead body.
And I was like, well, can you actually condense that space even more? Can you literally have your villain sitting next to your protagonist for an hour and a half and keep it interesting? And so it really started from there. And then after kind of, I have this weird, I don't really have a fear of flying so much as a fascination of the whole industry itself. And I'd spend some time on red eye flights, and I started kind of looking around and then the idea developed from there. I was fascinated by the idea of could you have a kind of, for lack of a better word, a phrase, a hostage scenario taking place on a plane and no one knows it. And I looked around, and as I was observing this, I'm like, yeah, because nobody's really paying attention to anyone else here, So that's how that came about, and it just developed from there.
Yeah. Suit yourself, but you might want to take a look at this first. J.R. Joe Reiser, your father? Yes.
Where did you get that?
Oh, I didn't get it. My associate grabbed it off your dad's desk, apparently next to your graduation picture. J.R. Definitely Dad's wallet, his initials. But gee, mine too. Jack Rickner, credit card, license. But for some reason, Miss Stewardess, this emotionally unstable, rather inebriated girl whom I've never met before tonight suddenly went crazy when I took it out of my pocket. You tell the flight attendant, and your dad dies.
And the relatability factor, I would later ask, one of the producers what drew them to the script, and this is, I think it was just a blessing to kind of, when you have that one clear idea. I never really thought of it this way, but he was the producer, Mason Novick. He's like, no, I got it, Carl. The first 10 pages, it's who's the creepiest guy you could ever sit next to on an airplane. I get it.
Can you describe for the audience about Home and about how that dark episode came about?
Home is an episode of the X-Files where Mulder and Scully meet the Peacocks. Is a family of inbred, I guess inbred. It's an inbred family, and you discover that the mother has been living on a pallet under the bed.
Take it easy, man. Take it easy. It's all right. It's all over. From the FBI. We're here to help. We're gonna make sure that you're safe. We're gonna make sure that you get home.
Mulder, she already is home. It's Mrs. Peacock. She's their mother.
Glenn Morgan and I wrote this episode. There was a book that we were reading called The Nature of Evil. And it basically talked about how nature is, you know, we all sort of have this rose-colored glasses of what nature really is, but the fact is that nature discards its young, nature eats its own. It does this thing to kind of make the gene pool better. And then the mother, there's a biography from Chaplin, Charles Chaplin, who, when he was in vaudeville, he was in England, he was very popular, and this family invited him home for a meal. And after the meal, for entertainment, they said, do you want to see something really special? And from under the bed, they wheeled this boy, this teenage boy. They said he was just a torso and a head. And they started singing and clapping, and the boys started dancing. And Chaplin was, you know, aghast, and we thought this was a great image to have for the mother. So that's how that came about. The crazy thing about this story is after X-Files, we were running Millennium, the show called Millennium with Lance Hendrickson was the star of. And back then, there was a thing called sweeps, where you put your special episodes during a certain time of year. I think they still have that, I guess. Yeah. And we talked to, we thought we had a great idea. Let's bring the Peacock brothers into Millennium. And we pitched the idea to the head of Fox at the time, Peter Roth. And he said, we'll never show the Peacocks again on television. The Peacocks are the reason why we have the V-chip. And we really thought that home was the most straightforward. That's the one that people are gonna, you know, understand easiest. And it became this crazy uproar from the very beginning when we sent the script out. Broadcast Standards called us and said, what are you thinking about? And then executives were calling us and said, you guys are sick. And I thought, how? But it was, you know, it became one of these iconic shows, and I'm really happy we've done it, I guess.
Well, I think it's sort of unfair to just focus on the grotesqueries of the story and not acknowledge the artistic qualities of it as well. I mean, you're doing more than just grossing people out. You're also talking about the image of American society.
Yeah. And what family means.
And what family means, what motherhood means.
Especially in, you know, the scary movie, you know, world, it tends to be a lot of women. There's often female protagonists, but they're often like, I'm confused, no one believes me, like, what shall I do? And then eventually everyone realizes she was right all along, and whatever, you come to her aid and some men come and save her and whatever. What I really wanted to do was have a really rich, interesting, complex, strong, beautiful, wonderful woman, but who just had all of this interesting stuff going on. And I think with all mother-child relationships, there is an element of guilt and burden, and however healthy your children are, they change your life, and it's scary and weird, and I like playing with that. So although not everyone has a catatonic son, everyone kind of has had moments where maybe they resent their children, and you don't want to talk about it because you love them and they're wonderful, but it's also tough. And so I kind of love playing with that. The boy in the movie, Jacob Tremblay, is a patient of hers. She's a clinical psychologist. My mother-in-law, who is also called Mary, like the character, also lives in Maine in a rural, remote house and is also a clinical psychologist. She's very nice and nothing weird happened to her. But she was an amazing resource, and I really, really wanted to, in telling this story, tell a very real psychological kind of story. So I spent hours on the phone with her talking about, like, what's that like for all three characters? Like, what's the dynamic there? For her, I think having patients come in and taking care of other troubled children when you have your own children, that you're already in an interesting situation there. You're torn between your responsibility, your patients, you know, you're taking away time from your children, there's resentment there. The whole thing is just kind of messy and rich, and anything messy and rich generally gets me excited.
You're in a terrible accident. You're not well.
I heard you last night. You're trying to send me away again. Because of him.
No, it's not because of him.
You gave him my room. You're replacing me.
No one could ever replace you. I promise.
People are scarier to me than, you know, the monster of the week or whatever in terms of, and also, and it comes out of, again, it's, you know, if the tension and suspense, it's, you know, when sometimes people have told me, it's like, well, I don't know, I'm not really into scary movies, or I don't want to watch Disturbia or something. I say, well, really, nothing happens for 2/3 of it, really. You know, it's all about sort of I'm a big fan of slow builds and sort of the anticipation, and I think the sort of the psychology of how these types of thrillers even work with the audience. And it's, you know, I always try to, you know, with each scene also try to imagine myself actually sitting in an audience watching the screen, and what am I, you know, it's that plays for me is just as much a part of the writing process as anything in terms of, and also the psychology of each, you know, of the story of what do I, you know, I'm kind of like, what do I want the audience to hopefully be feeling at this moment? What are they expecting? How can I turn that? And so to me, those are the sort of the elements that I think lead to successful psychological.
I also think, going back to something you said about Red Eye, I was saying to James the other day, like, Final Destination traumatized me because it's playing on such real fears. Like, sometimes you do a thing, and every time you do that little thing, you're like, but what if that just fell, or that just happened, or like something that could go wrong? I'm crazy neurotic, so I'm always worrying about the thing that could go wrong. That's what made those movies so successful, is that you're panicked. And the same with Red Eye. Like, it is scary being in a confined space with a stranger. Like, what if that guy is a complete psycho and you're stuck? I think tapping into those very real things is what sets psychological thrillers apart.
You've been watching a conversation on psychological thrillers on OnStory. Next up, filmmaker Matt Cooper and his short film, Flush.
My name's Matt Cooper, and my film is called Flush. So the idea for Flush came from a co-writer and myself just kicking around ideas for about a month. And then he was telling me a story one day about being in an airport bathroom, and the automatic flush toilet just kept going off, and he couldn't get it to stop, and he was late for his plane. And I had already been thinking about, separately, you know, these automatic flush toilets that have these red sensors on them, and like, why would you design this thing that's like in a private place that has like a beady red eye, you know? I was definitely putting some themes in there with technology and how far, you know, removed we are from each other, and pretty soon it's gonna be us and the robots, you know? And so I'm just kind of getting that theme in there in a very silly way. My name is Matt Cooper, and coming up next is my film Flush.
On Story is part of a growing number of programs in Austin Film Festival's On Story project, including the On Story PBS series, now streaming online, the On Story radio program and podcast in collaboration with Public Radio International, and the On Story book series available on Amazon. To find out more about On Story and Austin Film Festival, visit onstory.tv or austinfilmfestival.com.